the last time you didn't ask. How does this back go? Where's this back go?
Well, we are about to visit the observatory in Belmont in North Leeward. We had a little road. The road is very ashy and visibility is 0% at sometimes. You have to just stop and let the ash settle sometimes. So we're on the road to the observatory right now, so I give you guys a look.
Maybe they're wrong for the years now.
Until they remind me of me. It's so awesome.
Where's the entrance? The entrance.
The doors on because the land are coming, the distance to the coastline to impacted areas are so close.
Yeah.
By the time you get the information,
Yeah.
the key thing is really not to be in the valleys.
Yes.
No new construction in the valleys.
Yeah.
Do in areas that will be.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, this is the plot. This is 4 days ago. And all these little bits of noise are basically small, we call them long period earthquakes. And they're little explosions inside the conduit as the magma's coming up. So you can see them here. And then, I think these are all nice. And then the next day, you can see that there's coming more and more of them. And then this is actually the explosion that happened 2 days ago.
Well, that's the explosion.
That's the explosion, yeah. So we could see the number of these events building up. And to accommodate that sort of thing, we've got real-time displays like, this is an automatic count of the number of events. This is the last 5 days, and you can see this. It was slowly building up over a day,
Yeah.
and then it dropped because basically the explosion happened and the signal went continuous, and then we've had very few events since.
I see.
Okay. So these are the. I mean, my job is basically to sit in this office and just look at these plots
Yeah.
and shout, Richie, something is going on. But it gives us a good idea of what's going on
I see.
underneath the volcano in real time.
How long do those quakes before you can tell that you're going to have a really explosive event last for?
It's difficult. The problem we've got is that we've seen patterns at this volcano, and the patterns have changed during that. We've had 32 explosions now, and some of them had a build-up of events beforehand, some of them didn't. And so there's more, we're looking for changes in this. So this had a build-up to the explosion. There are no events now. We may well see a start and a build-up of these LPs, okay? If that happens, there could be some confidence it would take 2 days, but I would not bet money on it. I would not bet lives on it, you know.
Yeah.
It could be shorter.
Right.
But that's the sort of pattern we might see. But we might see other earthquakes. There's a thing called the VT, the volcano tectonic, and we might have to change the working model in our head.
How long? How long for that? Let's say that kind of activity.
Yeah.
How long that would go on before you say it's going to sleep?
This activity
Yeah,
here,
yeah, yeah.
it's not just this activity. You've got to use different measurements.
I see.
So if this has said nothing for a time period, we have ground deformation measured by GPS. If that says nothing's changing, and if the gas is low, then we would say it's gone back to sleep.
Okay.
But we really haven't answered the question how long we would want that to be. Because I come from Montserrat, and I think we wanted these to be quiet for 6 months.
Yeah.
Several months.
It's going to be dynamic
It's going to be something like that, but it's almost driven by the data. So
Yeah.
if we know the seismic's quiet, if the other two go quiet, then we'll start asking that question. I think it's bad to anticipate because other things might sort of take.
Would you say that volcanoes, to a particular style? Like I think they're saying there's a Vincentian style.
We may well have invented a Vincentian style. There's certain things about this eruption that have, I wouldn't say surprised, but we weren't expecting. The main one is the amount of ash. Huge amount of ash over the island,
Yeah.
which
Yeah, I mean,
didn't have in previous eruptions.
yeah.
I doubt it will be called the Vincentian eruption,
Yeah.
but it seems to be.
Yeah, I mean, each volcano has its own unique way of operating, really. So, and each time the volcano erupts, there's usually some unique circumstances. This one, we think, the unique circumstances here was the fact that you had a pre-existing dome, and then you had a new dome. Are we thinking? I mean, only thinking is that somehow affected the initial explosivity of what happened. So the fact that you had a dome that was sitting there for 42 years, and then you had another one, somehow affected the dynamics of the system. So that's not unusual because each time, so the way in which Soufriere erupted this time is slightly different in 79. In 79, they had a dome, but they had water, and the scientists then thought that why it erupted as it did is because of the interaction of new material, that interaction with the water was there. And in fact, the working theory, hypothesis then for Soufriere is that you have to have a lake to have it going into what they call a phreatomagmatic state and then a magmatic. Well, he didn't really have a lake, but he had his two domes. So it's each time it erupts, it teaches us new things. And I think what's going to be significant for this one is the extent to which we collected data. We collected a lot more data than we did last time. So I suspect, I think the Prime Minister would like to hear this, but I suspect that we will have scientists come in here many years studying this volcano. And I suspect we're going to have papers and we're going to have conferences, bringing people here, which is good, as you mentioned. We're already thinking about a conference next year.
Very good.
It was very good for us.
Yeah.
The activity started in December, and that's when we started putting in equipment.
Yeah.
So by the time it exploded, we actually had good equipment, whereas sometimes in volcanoes, you're coming after the explosion.
Yeah.
And there's this like hole in the knowledge. But here we've got a really good set of data from the entire eruption.
Professor, I wanted to ask, because I've been monitoring your site, exactly what does the continuous building and destruction of lava domes mean?
What? What it means for the island. Well, maybe it means
One
that.
meaning in
Well, that's our working sort of theory. It may, as you all say, it may
Do
absolutely.
you want to come here? Or do you want to do it
No,
outside?
I prefer this gentleman to be in the spotlight already. I
I'll do
think
it
I have
here,
enough spotlight already, right?
Maybe outside, because I...
Yeah. Enlightenment.
The doors are open,
Yeah, yeah.
things are coming.
Let's get it up. So what is happening with things is that the volcano is essentially, there's a lot of gas and not quite sure how much gas. And the gas is what drives it up. So what drives it is how much gas is in it and the ease with it until the gas comes out. Right? So what we think is that at the beginning, it had a lot of gas in it and it got rid of a substantial amount of it, right? And the gas that is available now to keep on running is probably a little less. And also, the conditions of the summer is different. You don't wake up enough. So the gas is able to come out of the sea. So what we're looking for is something that would probably restrict that. And one thing that could restrict it is if it goes a dome, which essentially means that it has a massive rock that will not stop the gas from coming out of the sea. All the things have been happening, and the pattern has slightly changed now, because the volumes are slightly different. But what we think will happen is that each time we had an explosion, it's because it basically got out of the cap, and then it dropped the explosion, it dropped the dome that was there, or the cap that was there, and then it started to sort of come out again, and slowly form the cap, and build up enough pressure, and have another explosion. So that's what we think for the last couple of days. It's slightly changed now. So to answer your question, it was kind of good in a sense that it meant that by doing that, it meant it didn't kind of build up enough pressure to have a huge explosion that went into those ash venting kind of areas. It meant that it could kind of, in a sense, it's a bit like a pressure cooker. It was, in a pressure cooker, easy steam, a little bit of steam was thrown out. And that to a certain extent was good. But to say it was good in the context of enlistment, it's better for the enlistment just to just go back to sleep, right? It's not good that I keep on having this gas and having this explosion. That's bad. But in terms of the extent to which it could have big explosions, probably it was good in that context. I think we could manage better if you don't have these discrete sort of booms every now and then, rather than having this ash jetting that puts ash in Barbados and all over the place and just makes it. You can see the conditions here are much nicer than it was when it was ashing.
Yeah.
We had ash like overnight. We went to sleep in ash and the ash came out. It's raining ash the whole day. That's not nice. So we would prefer the explosion to be, if there are explosions, to be more discreet. So in the context of your question, that's why I meant, that's how it affects us in a sense. Yeah.
So these domes can be built pretty quickly, because I know sometimes domes can take years to form.
Well, I think the thing that tricks people is that the dome that came out first was actually moving slower than Soufriere domes normally operate. And again, our working sort of theory of what's happening is that rather than the dome being grown, what was happening is that the material that was there is being pushed out. So it wasn't really so much growing as it is that the gas-rich magma that's below simply came up and pushed it out of the way. And once it had pushed it out of the way, because it was restricting it from coming out, it caused a lot more gas, a lot more pressure to build up, so that when it eventually got it out of the way, it just went crazy. And that's what we had in the first few days. So to the extent that that is what happened, if you're correct, it means that you kind of, to have that kind of explosivity, you kind of want to have, you will have to recreate those conditions. So as much as those conditions are not quite getting recreated, that's good. But also, we'd expect that as the gas runs out, one of the things that would probably happen is that you might get up it being that it comes out slow. You actually have a dome that sits there for the next 100 years probably, rather than 42. You want to go sleep and not. It's interesting to see these things, but it's not interesting that the effects that it has on people is not so good. So.
Professor, I've heard it said that the volcanic ash that is produced now is probably more suited to, or better suited for construction than agriculture. Is there any truth to that, as far as you know?
As far as I know, no. In the sense that that's not my sort of line in terms of usage. I could speak to the ash in terms of its composition, and the composition of the ash that's coming out now is not that much different than the ash that's ever come out of Soufriere. And the ash that always come out of Soufriere is the same material we use fundamentally to construct, and it's also the same material that produces a lot of the fertility they have. So in a sense, given what Soufriere has produced in the past, I would say that it's good for both, because the material is not different. But I don't know enough about agriculture and construction to say that. The ash essentially is pulverized rock. It's just the same rock that you have all over cylinders. You just break it up into pieces, make it really, really fine. That's the ash. It's not the ash. When people hear ash, I think it's a misnomer to say it's ash in the context of, it's not ash like fire ash, like firewood ash. It's not the same. Firewood ash is organic. This is particles of rock that's broken up. So you have crystals, bits and pieces of rock, so it's very abrasive, very corrosive. But it has crystals and minerals in it that are quite good for agriculture. So when we mix it into the soil, often the fertility of St. Vincent's land and even Barbados is because it's volcanic material. And the fact that we use a lot of the construction material we use here is actually volcanic. So in that sense, we although we have a hard time at its way, once it's done, it produces a lot of the materials that we use. The reason that we are here, the reason that we have the beautiful landscape we have, is because of volcanoes. So it's just that when they erupt, you cannot just have to run far from them, so they're dangerous.
I'm sorry, I know you've warned of the lahars and so on that would tend to come for months, years, even after eruptions would have ceased.
Yeah.
What would it take for us, from your perspective, to know whether or not it's safe for persons to rebuild in some of these locations that have been affected right now?
I think I was making a point earlier on when Rod was making a point about lahars and warning systems, is that lahars affect river valleys. All kinds of hazards affect river valleys. You shouldn't build in river valleys, so you shouldn't build there. So it's not that you can't construct. We have lots of mountains and things, lots of places that are not river valleys you can build in. So in
the red zones in
yes, there are lots of places that don't have river valleys. What happens is that when you build your town in river valleys, or when you build your structure in river valleys, expect, it's not the lahar alone, expect that when river come down, when you have heavy rain, you're going to get affected, because you're building a vulnerable area, so you shouldn't. So if you're asking me whether you should build in a vulnerable area, this is a bad idea. If you ask me if you should build absolutely in the areas that you have to evacuate now, that really is a matter of whether or not you want to deal with the risk of the volcano erupting in the future. There will always be areas that would be, when the volcano is not erupting, that would be safe to do all kinds of things in. But I guess when you're thinking long term, you need to think about, the chances, is this volcano erupt? Okay, if you put on a structure, how long you want to survive for? And if you want to survive for 100 years, that is a bad idea, because the volcano invariably going to erupt within the next 100 years, right? If you want to survive less than that, you see a balance. It's in 50 years, you think you're going to Europe in the next 50 years, but you don't put structures that you expect to last 100 years if you know. You understand? So that's the kind of dynamic, and that's a dynamic that the authorities, the planning people, government have to consider. What kind of assets you put in the areas, given that this volcano clearly has shown us that it's not so quiet anymore. It used to be, and given studies, it used to be that I've said it before, that I know for sure this will erupt once every 100 years. That's what the record going back to 4,000 or 5,000 years show. But certainly since 1902, it's increased the rate of eruption. So it's no longer 100 years, it's less than 100 years. I mean, you could calculate what it might be, give or take, but currently is less than 100 years. So when you develop in these areas, you have to consider that now. Vincentians will forever have to, I hope they get it, I got it, that's why I'm in this business. I got it that this volcano could erupt. It sounds like everybody forget that it could. And you shouldn't be. If you're here, hopefully, if one thing that this volcano does in eruption is make sure St. Vincent understands that. Not only St. Vincent, but I don't know where you're from, but anywhere near West Indies, including Trinidad, because you could have ash coming in your direction. Barbados, you can't take volcanoes for granted. We are fortunate in the region that we have volcanoes that don't erupt very often, but we are not fortunate that we don't have volcanoes. We have volcanoes, that's why the landscape is created largely by volcanism. The beautiful land that we have, but it comes with its dangers. So when we factor in development, we are factoring volcanoes. And we haven't.
So this increased activity that we've seen, as you said, over the last 100 years, could it be down to increased earthquake activities? What is the science with regards to this?
We don't know. I mean, if you think of it, we've been looking at volcanism and volcanoes for a short space of time. Soufriere is close to a little bit over 1 million years old. We've only been looking at, I'm speaking about the last, we have a lot of details to it in the last 10,000 years, maybe a little bit more than that. really detailed information. We only have it in the last 4,000 years. And so I'm telling you that it looks like within the last 100 years, it's changed slightly. I'm just looking at a very small, tiny thing. So I would not hold that as something to make any major conclusions on. All I would do is hold that to mean that at least from now on, we need to factor in volcanism and volcanoes and volcanic eruptions into the scenario in St. Vincent, the scenario in the rest of the region. So things like aviation, things like, movement of people, all of that. You don't have to start getting frightened. You just have to start planning for the possibility that if a volcano in Dominica goes off, what do the region do? Not Dominica alone. It's not a Dominican problem alone. This is not St. Vincent problem alone. It's a regional problem. And I'm saying that we haven't taken it seriously, and we need to. So if it's one thing they should tell us, is that we should, and I could say more about that, but I'll then start telling you about the fact that you need to make sure that agencies like what I work for, we have the resources to do what we do. You need to investigate what kind of resources we have, you journalists. Figure it out. See how this little agency that hardly have any money doing what it's doing.
Do you have all
It's
the
amazing.
resources you need
No.
here in St. Vincent for the work you're doing now?
Yes, of course. That's what tends to happen, governments and agencies, when something happens, and generally there has been traditionally support for the agency verbally by all the governments, but often there's a shortfall when things are not. All the governments and all the territories have tightness. We live in a resource constrained region, and generally once something is happening, you have the resources you need. So there's no problem with the resources. We have a lot of support from NEMO. We have a lot of support to do what we're doing. My point is that when it falls off, and it often does, when it falls off when nothing is happening, because we don't see the need for agencies like this unless something is happening. That's the mindset we have, and I'm saying that is a bad thing. It should be that we see the need for agencies like this all the time, because we have seen what it can do. And you could look back in history, look back on when things like this has happened before, in any place in the world. Look at how we have operated, and look at how others have operated. And you should feel proud, citizens should feel proud about what we have done. And therefore you should invest in the agency. If it's one thing, I'm not the head of seismic anymore, and therefore I can speak like that. When I was the head, I have to be a bit more circumstantial. I'm telling you, I'm not. There's one thing the world and the region need to learn, is that you need to support seismic beyond anything else. It is needed. It is necessary. Whether you have volcanoes erupting or not. You have earthquakes, you have problems. We're not serious about that. We, as a people in the region, the Caribbean, we need to be more serious about that.
Professor, do you have an average of funding annually compared in terms of now compared to what it would need to adequately be able to do what such a unit should be doing annually?
So I'll again put it back. It's investigative journalism. If you go back and you check how much we survive on, you'll be amazed. It's amazing what seismic does with the resources that we have. So if you ask me that question, we have never had the resources we need. That's a fact, and therefore we have learned to survive with very little. By looking for projects, by making collaborations. This operation here, you see 3 of us, and unfortunately the face of income, mine for whatever reason, it's not me alone. It's a ton load of people. People at seismic, people at Montserrat, and also people outside. Because of the fact that we don't have any resources, we have had to learn to survive with very little. Now what that does is that then tells the governments that, you can survive with 10,000. Right. That's all you need, right? But it means that it's a kind of a negative thing. When you're so efficient and surviving and very little, it means that you don't get very little. So your answer to your question in terms of resources. If you look at what we have versus other agencies, both in this region and internationally, you will be amazed at what we do versus what we have in terms of funding. It is extremely insufficient. We are fantastic. We're good now. We have attention, and the government here and all governments have supported us verbally. But when you come down to the actual real thing, sometimes it's very different.
Professor, I just want to ask another quick question as it relates to the volcano. In terms of the topography of the land, has she changed the topography of the land at all?
Of course, that volcanoes create land. Why? The place that we stand in here was once a volcano, part of a volcano. Volcanoes do that, so that I'd expect that to change. But it changes because of the size of the eruptions that we see now. It looks big for us, but in the context of eruptions, it's kind of not that huge, so that the changes will be small. So right now, it's put up a lot of deposits in the valleys.
Right.
In some cases, it would extend the size of the land coastally. So the changes currently are marginal. You might see mainly the changes at the summit. You have a huge crater now in there that you didn't have before. But over the long term, volcanoes create landscape, create land. So I would expect that the changes that you have now, maybe not as big as, say, in the past, but I expect the changes to continue and to go on as the volcano connects.
And I know that magma is flowing beneath the surface, moving beneath the surface. Any chance that you might see magma actually a magmatic eruption, if you were to put it that way?
Well, we are having a magmatic eruption. I think when you speak about magma, what you're talking about, and again, is a lava flow.
Yes.
In people's perception, lava means lava flow. Means the things like what you see in Hawaii. Our volcanoes don't operate like that. When magma comes to the surface, it forms lava. That's just a general term for the magma that is at the surface. In other places like Hawaii and Iceland, the magma is very runny. It's not very viscous. It's not sticky, and it runs outside. And that's what you see. It looks fantastic. Our volcanoes in the region, unfortunately, they're not very runny. They're very sticky. So as soon as they start coming out, they start stopping themselves from coming out. And essentially, they always will be creating conditions under which they will tend to explode. So they stop themselves, and the pressure builds up, and they explode. So the magma, the lava that you're talking about, is all here. That's the lava outside. That sand, that ash that you have there, that is lava. That's the lava that's been fragmented. It's been thrown out of the volcano up into the air, falling down as pyroclastic flows. It's been rebombalized as lahars. That's the same lava. It's not going to flow like the running lava. It's going to fragment and have these big explosions.
You spoke a while ago about the prospective change of the landscape on Soufriere. In terms of access points, I know there's an access point in the Leeward and one on the windward side.
Yeah.
Do you envisage any changes, and is there the potential for any new areas being developed to access the volcano going forward?
Not fundamentally. As I said, I don't think the change is really huge. It's going to be more superficial than anything else. And unless the eruption goes on for a long time and bigger, it's going to be more or less the same Soufriere. Apart from the top itself, it's going to be a slightly different structure. But I think you asked me enough questions, okay? I didn't plan to answer so much questions. I want you to focus on something else.
Just one other question, Professor. Given the extent of volcanoes in the region, what is the seismic clock saying about the next possible active event?
In the region?
In the region.
I think you should ask the director seismic clock.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Check it. Must be just just check it back on.
It's I'm guessing.
Belmont Observatory
Right in front of there, that's
taking a look right
huge amount
ahead
of
at
ash.
the
It's present,
you know,
and there's still a fair amount of ash.
Inside the crater, there's a hole, big hole, and it's actually on the southern side. It's some white stuff. That white stuff is kind of close to this.
we can appreciate the amount of ash it has.
You go down into that. It comes sort of way it slopes down to the right. You go down, you'll have a deep hole, and that's where it's sort of a lot of the activity is happening.
And you're going to build up, you're going to build a dome and have a hole.
Yes, you might have a crater lake in the future, which is a nice tourist attraction.
You know, before 71, when you went up Soufriere, but none of you're all too young to know that. But you know it because you have been growing up there before 71. There was a lake, you know, and people used to go down and swim in it. I go right down to the edge as a boy, as a youngster, put my foot by the water and so on. I never went into it. Other people went in and did. It's better for it to have a hole than a dome.
Depends, but I would think that it's better for it to have maybe because you don't pressurize it. So
Okay. The hole is a beautiful tourism site to the water. Lovely, peaceful looking water. Yeah. Georgetown done and Monganan.
President used to have a rubber DP in Soufriere. And he used to go up there and rubber.
Yeah, he used to
I went into the Soufriere and swam about 4 different
Don used to go in it.
But we don't have that many rubber DP.
Yeah. Became a Roman Catholic. Yeah, he became a Roman Catholic. In fact, he ushered me. Yeah, he was a man full of spirit. Sunset spirit. He's the biggest